Oh no, it's not. So with the rest of the bank account direct as opposed to being fronted on by
Alright folks, it looks as though we've got just about everybody, so let's just make a start. I think we're starting to get a copy of them. We can just make a start just now if you want, so we can be done by 1 o'clock. If you have a look at your sheet in front of you, you'll see that it's about weekly and monthly review. So, if we're trying to compare that to anything we've done already, we're looking at retrieval practice, and we are thinking about how we embed that in our lessons and how we make that effective to make sure that people are learning, and not only just that they're learning, but they're actually retaining what they've learned, and they're able to remember it for more occasions than just once after we've done it. So it's not falling out of their memory, but it's actually something that we're topping up week by week. So I'll just give you a wee second to have a read over the first few bullet points there. Okay, so that's really what we're going to be going through today. So those kind of 3 bullet points. I'll bring that back at the end of the presentation as well, so you get another chance to have a wee look at that. And this one's quite important if we're talking about generating study resources. It's quite easy for most of us to either find things or adapt things, give someone a booklet and say, here's a study pack, go and read this, go and study this. But we know from our experience, we know from what we've already learned that isn't always effective, it's not always going to work, it's not always going to help with retrieval practice. Actually producing your own study materials or giving people tasks to produce their own materials can be something that's much more effective and more likely to help them retain that information so they can retrieve it much easier. So what we're talking about here is activities that you can maybe do for that. So have a wee read at what it says there, and it'll maybe kind of generate some ideas for you. I think it's important to make sure if you're doing a retrieval task that you've, as well, if you look at the 3rd paragraph there, that you've chosen something specific for them to review before you're testing it, and you're giving them a clear direction as to where they need to go to find that. To maybe give you an example, with my higher class recently, we've been looking at a new text, finished reading the text. What I asked them to do was go back to the beginning of the book, gather their first impressions of the characters and make sure that they had made a list of who the main characters are, what do they know about those characters. A few days later we come back into the class, right, we're going to be working in mixed up groups. You're going to spend 5 minutes writing about the character that's in front of you, what do you know? And it was to see if they could remember what they'd actually written down without having the safety net of having the screen beside them or having notes that were already prepared. It actually had to be something that they had already looked at. But to build on that, we then need to think what we're going to do with those notes. So once we've had a chance to have a discussion with other people, are we going to create something else that becomes a study resource for us? And then that's up to me to say next week, you've done the 3rd task, now we're maybe going to do a quiz on it. We're going to see how much of that you've actually remembered so that it doesn't fall out of our memory. So it's maybe thinking about things like that. This is another important one for us, is giving time to pause, to look over that material. We don't always want to just rattle through everything as quick as we can, but actually give people a time to reflect on what they've done, reflect on what they've learned, and see if they can remember that. And if that's part of your routine, that's going to be really helpful as well, so they know it's not a shock or a surprise to know that they're being tested or being put on the spot, but actually, oh, this is something we do every week. We're going to review this part of the course. It might not be every week for you, it might be monthly, it might be that you decide something that you did in August. Actually, every month you need to come back to that topic because it's going to be important later on. And I think that's something we are working on there as well. If I'm thinking of my own subject, we will work on some parts of the course in stages, but I can't let someone do a critical essay and then never touch it again for weeks on end because I'm doing something else. I need to make sure that there's always something going on in the background so that they don't forget about that. So something to remember as well. We'll get through this quite quickly. Okay. So I mentioned a wee bit ago there about quizzing. You can find an activity that you think suits your class or your group of pupils best on how you want to test their recall. And it's important to shake that up as well, that you don't want to be getting into a habit of saying we're going to do a quiz and then every single week it's a quiz, because you're just testing the same skill over and over again. That you want to try and vary that, and not something that's again going to put people on the spot or confuse them, but actually just keep them on their toes and know that they might be getting something different next week. But knowing that there's rigour of we're doing a retrieval activity and it's going to be about this, you need to be using the resources that we made last week, or you need to be looking at the resources you created in a group, all of that to go back to. And as long as that's directed and you're giving time to that and devoting time to it, you're showing that it's important and it's something that we need to be doing as part of our practice. That the idea of revision should just be something that's ongoing and part of our everyday work. So if we're doing reviews in class every week, every month, it's not something that just comes up around the time of assessment, but it's ongoing. I think that's really important. But there's a whole variety of different techniques there, and there's nothing new. You'll have seen all of that before, and we've gone over lots of these sorts of things as well. Okay. And this might be something that just takes 5 minutes, it might be 15 minutes, it might be an entire lesson where you've just paused to allow for all of these things to occur.
Really quickly, because I think I missed this. See the elaborative interrogation and the rehearsal and performance, what is that again?
So we're talking about elaborative interrogation. It's meaning that we're not just questioning and moving on, but continuing to question. So you've got an answer, but maybe you've got part of the answer. Do we need to dig deeper in that? Do we need to go back and have more of a discussion about it? Do we need to keep going until we've got everything that we need?
Right.
Have we explored all the options? And then when you're talking about rehearsal and performance, giving a chance for maybe people to discuss, talk about their answers in advance, so it's giving you a chance to not, like, you know what it can be like if somebody's quite embarrassed if they think we're going to go whole class discussion, but actually if we're doing that in pairs, if we're doing that in groups first, and we're getting a chance, maybe you're getting round to listen to what they're saying, that's a really good answer. I think you should speak up when we get in, they're getting a chance to prepare it before it's out in the open, if you like. Well, that's a good question. Any more questions here, Slide? Right, so just have a wee read at those few points there. This is just going to link back to the previous slide as well about giving extra time. Devoting the time to the errors is really important as well. I know that we want to move on, we want to progress all the time, because there will be people in the room that do know everything and are able to recall, but actually giving more time to consolidate is really quite important as well. So if you are doing a quiz and not everybody's confident in that, or not everybody's doing something, actually taking the time to maybe explain a bit more, to delve into why that is, find out what the issue is. If it's a big enough problem that lots of people don't know, then just like it says there, it's an idea to go back and reteach that. You might even think about doing it a different way. Do you need to set up a group activity because last time it was individual and people just weren't getting it? Or is it a group activity where actually it might have worked better as something individual? Does the outcome need to be in a different format? So it's about rethinking how you could teach something if it doesn't quite work the way that you need it to the first time. Because ultimately our goal is to make sure that everybody is on board with the concepts we're trying to teach. And then I think this gives room for saying that those gaps are important as well, because if there's anybody that doesn't understand anything, or they're thinking they're getting something wrong, even when they're doing that recall, that's a safe space for everybody to be able to make mistakes and to be able to have those errors. Right, why did we get it wrong? How do we explore it? How do we fix it? So as well. And then this one I really like, and I'm sure most people will as well. That it's making sure that the pupils in the class understand that you're not just teaching one thing and then moving on, but actually you can make connections between different things. I know that in my subject, if we're teaching Scottish text and we're teaching critical essay, the outcomes are different, but actually the skills that are needed to develop, to be developed throughout that are all the same. So if we're able to make connections by something you've already learned before and say, actually you already know how to do this, we're just applying it in a slightly different way, that's going to build a picture for them that's going to connect it. It's not just one thing that they don't know how to do, but actually they do know how to do it, they're just connecting it elsewhere. This even happened a few weeks ago. I had a conversation with Sharon in history, and it turns out that we were teaching something quite similar, like the way that we were teaching pupils to answer a question in history was quite similar to the way we were teaching it in English. And actually, we'd never spoken about that before, but if the pupils were given something that had similar language and they knew how they were supposed to answer it was quite similar, it might make it easier, where they might perform really well at it in history, but not know how to do it in English. And actually it's the same skill, and if we'd made them aware of that connection, they might be able to retain that way of doing it. So it makes it more relevant for them if they can build a picture of that. So that's really important as well. And I think that is us pretty much at the end. So you have your sheets in front of you. Just gives you a chance to kind of break down how you might include doing some sort of monthly or weekly review in one of your classes. You've got loads of time for this, because I think I've just raced through it in 10 minutes. So you've got 15 minutes if you want to talk about it. If you want to talk about any examples, we'll come round and talk to you as well. Just write yourself a plan for something you might want to try out next week with your classes. If you're thinking, I want to review something with them, what kind of retrieval practice could I do? How is it going to be most effective in this class? And is it something that you could build in that's maybe a 5, 10 or 15 minute task every couple of weeks?
I'm going to do the first 5 minutes again, Kieran, because Joanna sat right bang in front of the camera.
Stop it.
Sorry, take two.
Back of her head.